Now, every week seems to be a big week in the Gaza-Israel war, which is now 7 months old. Hard to imagine, but it is. But this week arguably has been one of the biggest because of the political shifts going on. You've got the United States for the first time saying quite clearly, if you carry on with your military operation in Rafah, in the city of Rafah, in the southern Gaza Strip, without making sure that 1.4 million people who are there as refugees have a safe place to find refuge in another part of the Gaza Strip, although God knows how and where that should happen, then we will deny you certain offensive weapons which you need in order to conduct your war, although we will not deny you the weapons that you need for your Iron Dome to shoot down any incoming missiles. But that's a big declaration from the Americans. It's a departure from what's happened before. And of course, it puts even more pressure on the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, to decide whether to listen to his best friends at Washington or to the coalition partner he needs in the government in Israel, without which his government would topple and his future might look rather uncertain. So he seems to have made his choice to stick with the coalition partners, some of whom are extremists, and not listen to the Americans. At the same time, you've got the very dramatic movement of people inside the Gaza Strip, tens of thousands of them moving from the very crowded refugee city that is Rafah into those refugee areas, encampments on the beach in this place called Al-Mawasi. And then, of course, and this is the question we're asking this hour, the level of protest that this has ignited around the world, not just at university campuses in the US, where we've seen some very dramatic scenes in the last week, but also here in the UK. And then, of course, tonight, that kind of festival of sugary music that is the Eurovision Song Contest that once again has become embroiled in politics. With 10,000, 12,000 protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters marching in Malmö, in Sweden, ahead of tonight's broadcast, which is going to be watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world. So there's a lot of politics going on. And the question really is, once again, and I think it's important to ask this, why do you think the Israel-Gaza war and what the IDF is doing in Gaza has ignited so many protests around the world when other actions by other governments, arguably more brutal, China, North Korea, Syria at the time, has not done that? And I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that Israel purports to be, a modern democracy with a free press and, with the civilized values of the so-called West, but yet it is doing what it is doing in Gaza. And then it explains it often by saying we live in a very rough neighborhood, and sometimes you have to be rough in order to survive in that rough neighborhood. So which is it? Is it the rough neighborhood or is it European values? How important do you think this week has been for Israel?
It's not a turning point in the war. It's just a continuation of everything that we've seen for the past 7 months. Since the beginning of the war, the Israeli government has been telling us that they're going to crush Hamas. And they said, if we take the north of the Gaza Strip, we'll do it. And then the city of Gaza, and then the Shifa hospital, and the Jabalia refugee camp, and Khan Yunis. And in the last 3 months, they've been talking about taking Rafah as the ultimate battle that will bring Israel victory. All this in the shadow of the Israeli government refusing to have a political endgame here. And without a political endgame, there is no way for Israel to end this war. Because Hamas will remain in place. They will engage in insurgency. They shot rockets into Israel just yesterday. They continue to do that and surprise the Israelis. We don't know where their leadership is underground in their tunnel network. And this war is not winnable in the traditional sense of battlefare. We need a political endgame.
Do you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu and his cabinet want this war to go on indefinitely? Does it serve their interests?
It certainly does. For the more extreme elements in his government, they want to create havoc not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, amongst the 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel. They see this as an opportunity to expel Palestinians from the Holy Land of Israel. And this is so dangerous. It's just crazy. And Netanyahu is hostage to them. But let's not forget that since 2009, Netanyahu has built a strategy and implemented it to prevent any chance of there ever emerging a Palestinian state next to Israel.
We have been remarking on the fact that Joe Biden's public comments, trying to basically, rein in Prime Minister Netanyahu are very unusual to be made in such a way by an American president. We've also remarked on the fact that, they've said they will not supply offensive weapons if the IDF goes into Rafah. But at the same time, if you look at what the administration is saying, and if you look at the State Department report that's quite critical of American weapons possibly being used to commit international human rights abuses, they're pulling their punches, aren't they?
They certainly are. Well, let's not forget that the election time clock of President Biden is ticking and ticking very fast as he's losing support within his own party. And it's not by chance that Mr. Netanyahu, who really identifies with the Republican Party and Donald Trump, has managed to bring out the voices from the Republican Party against Biden's policy, who's changed policy now on Israel. We're hearing a barrage of comments from Republicans at all different levels of the American government attacking President Biden. And this is, in my mind, no doubt coming from Jerusalem.
So you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing what he's doing in order to make sure, or to make it very possible that Biden loses the election to Donald Trump, and then once Trump is reelected, they've got a very strong friend in the White House?
Well, I would caution Donald Trump being called a very good friend of anyone. He's the most unpredictable person.
No, but in terms of making Biden lose the election, do you think that's what they're doing?
I think that there are strategists around Netanyahu, maybe Netanyahu himself, who would prefer to see Trump in the White House, which is quite amazing because there has never been an American president who has been more supportive of Israel than Biden. No one has granted Israel the amount of money, the amount of weapons, the amount of political support, the use of the U.S. veto, more than Biden has for Israel. And this is the slap in the face that he's getting from Netanyahu and his government.
Because Biden is being slammed from both sides, isn't he? He's being slammed by, the pro-Palestinian Arab Americans in places like Michigan, or students on the university campuses who think he's being too soft on Israel, and then by pro-Israeli Republicans or Americans who think actually he's not doing enough. So falling between two stools.
Right, he is. But what I would say to President Biden, if he were to listen to me, is that those people who are bashing him from the right would never vote for him anyway. So he shouldn't worry about them. He needs to do the right thing, and the right thing is to help or to force Israel to end this war. And there is a Biden doctrine, which is a political endgame, and American culture needs to be much more vocal in terms of putting together that political endgame for Israel. And it has to be the emergence or the realization of a two-state solution. Because Israel will never have security if Palestinians don't have liberation, freedom, and dignity. Palestinians will never have liberation, freedom, and dignity if Israel doesn't have security. There's an equation here, and the two-state solution is amazingly back on the table after many of us thought it was dead for years already.
Just finally, Gershon, as an Israeli, why do you think this particular war has ignited protests, the likes of which we haven't seen for a very long time, both in the United States, in the UK, and indeed elsewhere?
Well, I think one is the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th were beyond imagination. They were so brutal and atrocious that they got the attention of the world. But Israel's actions in Gaza since October 7th have also been atrocious. And too many innocent people have been killed. Too much destruction has happened, a needless destruction. Israel didn't need to destroy 70% of the buildings in Gaza, the homes in Gaza, and make 1.5 million people homeless once again in order to fight against Hamas. And because there's the absence of any kind of political game here, no one sees the point of continuing to fight.
But is it also about the fact that Israel purports to be, a Western nation, free press, rule of law, etc., which of course many Palestinians say does not, including Arab Israelis, does not apply to them, and you can't live by those standards and then do what you're doing in Gaza.
Of course, Israel puts itself to a higher standard, and therefore the criticism against Israel is at a different level than one might criticize Syria or Sudan or even Russia and what it's doing in Ukraine, because Israel has been a member of the club of liberal democratic nations, at least in its own mind. And as you said, while Israel is quite democratic for Jewish citizens of Israel, it is less democratic for the citizens of Israel.
And briefly, do you think if being expelled from the Eurovision Song Contest, which of course hasn't happened, but people are upset about it, does that hurt Israelis? Do they take that stuff seriously?
Well, Israel takes Eurovision extremely seriously. You wouldn't believe how seriously they take it. And we've seen Eden Golan, the Israeli singer, move in the polls last night after she performed in the semifinals from position number 8 to position number 2. There seems to be a response against the politicization of the Eurovision contest, where people are now supporting her more than ever, and she actually has a shot at winning, which would be quite amazing. She is a very talented artist, and the song that she's singing is also a pretty good song for Eurovision.
So I just want to start with this with you in terms of why do you think the anti-Israeli demonstrations that we're seeing remarkably spreading across campuses in the US, but also the UK and other countries, and of course the stuff about the Eurovision Song Contest, why has what Israel is doing ignited popular anger in such a way when atrocities committed by other countries, North Korea, China, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the Yemen war, have not done the same? What is it about Israel?
I think that the first thing is that this is a globalized, televised genocide that so many people are witnessing on their screens. I think social media has changed the game when it comes to actually showing people what's happening on the ground. And so silencing journalism, though they've killed many journalists in Gaza, has not stopped their war crimes from being leaked to the rest of the world. And the images we're getting are horrendous and awful. And I don't think I've ever seen something on that large of a scale. I can't think of the last war where this many children have been killed, where over 35,000 civilians have been killed by a country that is supported by the West. Some of the other countries that you speak of, a lot of the times that there is this Western narrative, right? That they're not democratic, they're not so on. Israel claims to be this beacon of democracy.
Isn't that the point, though, that it claims to be different to any other country in the neighborhood, and on one level, on several levels, you could say that it is, but it's not different for the Palestinian minority, either inside Israel or indeed those in the occupied territories.
I wouldn't even say that. I think that it's different in all aspects, from its foundations, which are built on ethnicity and religion, to the crimes they've committed. I cannot think of a genocide that's taken place in 6 months in any other country in the world since World War II of this level. The closest one I can think of is Srebrenica, and there we have around 8,000 to 10,000 people killed.
Just getting back to the protests, Yahya, to what extent are they being coordinated at the moment, the campus protests in the US and the ones in the UK?
There's a lot of coordination, both between the US and the UK, yes, and also within the UK campuses.
And how does that work?
We at the Association of Student Activists of Palestine, we support a lot of the campuses. We reach out to them, and we offer them training, and we help them organize and also their logistics. At the same time, there are many other groups that are helping as well, and we're all working together to ensure that the focus right now is on Gaza. All these encampments, whilst sometimes there is some focus on them and they're making the news. Right now, there is a deadly invasion happening in Rafah, and the focus is on making that more public, so that people, the public, can ask, why is this going? Why is all of this happening at universities? It's happening because there is genocide taking place in Gaza, and I think now is there is no more urgent time than now to take action and to make student voices very clear.
So there's the issue of the freedom of speech, that you're free to protest, and then there's the issue of the freedom of movement and the freedom to study. I know that there are many Jewish students who are also part of these demonstrations, but there are also many, many Jewish students in the US and the UK who are very upset by these protests, who believe they cannot go to class as usual. They feel threatened by what they call, outbursts of anti-Semitism. That's how they feel. What do you say to them?
I mean, I can't talk about specifically on how they feel. I can talk about from the encampments that I've seen and helped with. There is zero tolerance, for anti-Semitism and all types of racism, all types of discrimination. And secondly, just at the encampment, one of the encampments that I visited at UCL, there was a lot of cooperation between the security. Oh, there's exams now. We'll turn down the microphones. There's there's a lot of cooperation, but at the same time, there needs to be some level of disruption so that the university also takes their demands seriously. And so it's a fine balance. But I think in the UK at least, in a lot of campuses, the protests are, in their initial phase, and we're hoping that universities will engage.
And does that mean lecturers taking part in the protests as well? Professors joining? I mean, you're a professor, but more professors.
Staff involved. Yeah. There are many staff involved in many of the encampments that I've seen across the UK.
I mean, just want to end on this irony. It is quite possible, according to many analysts in the United States, less so here, that the campus wars or the campus protests in America, which remind people of what happened in 1968 against the Vietnam War, will help Joe Biden lose the election. And however critical you might be of the current administration, a future administration under Donald Trump is very likely to be even more on the side of Israel than this one. So it would be counterproductive.
I think on that matter, I can't talk much on US policy, but there is a wolf in sheep's clothing, and then there is a wolf. Joe Biden, whilst he's made statements, just the report that's been released yesterday about the crimes being committed and US bombs being used, despite saying stuff, they're still giving weapons to Israel. They're still supporting
but would you
Israel.
rather see Donald Trump in the White House? Because he's very open about his support for Israel. Because that could be the consequence of these campus wars.
I don't think that the responsibility falls on the campuses and the students. I think that responsibility falls on the government. If the government has lost trust from students and from its people, then that's its fault to blame. So Joe Biden is to blame if he loses. Would I like to see Donald Trump in office? Probably not. Definitely not. But I mean, when it comes to Palestine, there's not that much difference.
And just finally, you mentioned lecturers that have already joined. Have you actually seen that? Have you seen university lecturers at the various universities where you've seen them taking part?
Yes, I've spoken to them.
And with the blessing of the leadership of the university, or not, or they're just ignoring it?
I don't think universities particularly give blessing. They try and, at this stage, they're saying, okay, this is freedom of speech. You can do this. That's fine, as long as you're not too disruptive. So staff have come and shown support, but I don't think they require blessings from the administration of the university.
Right. And in America, we've seen the police being called in by the university leadership and cracked down in Columbia and UCLA and so on. Do you think there's a danger of that happening in the UK?
It depends on how long the universities stall negotiations and demands. If they get with the students on the table and actually start discussing what their legitimate concerns are, then hopefully the disruptive behavior won't be excessive.
Right. And your demands are this divestment of Israeli interests. That's what you want, the same as in the American.
That's number one. Number two is a condemnation of the crimes that have taken place in Gaza and the destruction of educational institutions such as every university in Gaza. And then the third one, a pledge to be part of the rebuilding of the education system in Gaza and providing scholarships and participating in a Palestinian-led rebuilding of that.
Right. And if you get those condemnations at the end of the day, would you also demand a condemnation of Hamas's crimes against Israelis on October the 7th?
I think...
Surely that's a yes, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, look, there has been worldwide condemnation of that.
But why not repeat it? Why not repeat it?
Because right now the focus is on
that would keep Jewish students who are very worried about what's going on. They would at least, reassure them to some extent.
The university has already condemned those crimes. Any crimes against civilians, the universities many of them have already condemned that. What they have failed to condemn is the crimes that Israel has committed in Gaza. And I think the focus right now is on what they've been silent about, not what they've been vocal about.